What happens when the most carefully staged room in American government suddenly stops following the plan? The cameras are live. The seating is deliberate. The talking points are printed. Everyone knows where to look. When to smile, when to clap, when to pivot. This is how power protects itself. With choreography, with timing, with the comforting illusion that the person at the center is in control. And then, without warning, the rhythm breaks. Faces tighten. Staffers glance at each other. Executives hold their posture a second too long. You can almost hear the mental scramble. How do we steer this back? How do we keep this from becoming the story? Because today isn't really about politics. It's about power under pressure. It's about attention, discipline, and a moment inside the White House that exposed something no press release can cover. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear explains far more than one meeting ever could. It starts, not with shouting, not with chaos, but with something far more unsettling. A quiet pause in the most powerful building on earth, where everyone in the room knows the script, and yet nobody knows what the president will do next. What unfolded wasn't merely awkward. It wasn't merely embarrassing. It was revealing in a way that makes your stomach tighten, if you're paying close attention. Donald Trump sat across from oil executives in what was supposed to be a controlled, disciplined display of competence, an image designed to signal stability to markets, allies, and rivals. But instead of a clean performance, the meeting turned into a slow-motion breakdown of focus, structure, and presidential instinct. This is a kind of moment age dread, because it can't be edited in real time. It can't be pinned on a staff error. It can't be blamed on a hostile reporter. It's happening in full view, with cameras rolling and people who understand the stakes watching every second. And almost immediately, you could feel the drift. It began with a familiar pattern. Praise that didn't lead anywhere, slogans that replaced specifics, repetition that sounded like confidence until it started sounding like a loop. Every sentence bent back toward himself, his strength, his wins, his dominance, as if diplomacy, sanctions, energy policy, even regional conflict were just set pieces in production built to feed his ego. But this wasn't a rally. There was no cheering crowd to turn improvisation into momentum. No loyal audience ready to applaud even when the message dissolved. This was a room full of executives, officials, and live coverage. People expecting coherence, expecting a through line, expecting a president capable of staying on track long enough to deliver a message that actually mattered. Instead, they watched him wander. He improvised. He contradicted himself. He slipped into strange military imagery, armadas, waves, domination, speaking about Venezuela as if it were both resolved and unfinished at the same time, declaring triumph while implying force, projecting control while sounding oddly unmoored. And the people in that room understood exactly what was at stake, not just politically, not just rhetorically, financially, strategically, historically. This wasn't about symbolism. It was about leverage, sanctions, production timelines, and the global energy market. A misstatement in that setting isn't just a gaffe. It's a signal, and signals move money. Because let's be honest, the meeting wasn't built on patriotism. It was built on access. It was about power and profit intersecting in a place where the consequences ripple outward. The executives weren't there out of civic duty. They were there because proximity to the presidency has value, especially when geopolitical instability creates opportunity. And Trump, in that moment, seemed to absorb their attention the way a man absorbs oxygen, as validation, as fuel, as proof that he's still the center of the world. He smiled. He lingered in the flattery. He soaked up praise. And as the praise slowed, you could see something else happen. The thread began to slip entirely. Then the first crack became impossible to miss. Marco Rubio, sitting nearby, did something no cabinet official wants to do on camera. He intervened, not with a public correction, not with an argument, with a note, a quiet piece of paper slid across the table. Less like policy coordination, more like a basic redirection. A reminder to return to the agenda, to move on, to stay anchored. In any well-run administration, that kind of course correction happens off-camera, discreetly, behind closed doors. But here it unfolded live. And Trump's reaction to that note was its own story. The hesitation, the flicker of confusion, the irritation that followed, the choice to read aloud, turning a private steering mechanism into public theater, and then the reflex that always appears when he feels guided, the need to reassert dominance, to show the room he wasn't being managed. At the exact moment he was demonstrating that he had lost his place, what should have been a seamless transition became an uncomfortable spectacle. And when the executives tried to get back to the practical details, operations, numbers, logistics, you could see Trump's attention drift again. His posture shifted. His eyes wandered. His restlessness surfaced. The substance bored him now that the spotlight wasn't pure praise. This is where the moment crossed from awkward to alarming, because leadership at this level isn't about theatrics. It isn't about bravado. It's about sustained focus. It's about absorbing information long enough to make choices that won't spiral into disasters. It's about respecting that meetings like this are not casual conversations. They are instruments of state power. And yet here was the President of the United States visibly checking out of a discussion touching international energy, sanctions, regional leverage, and geopolitical risk. Then came the moment nobody in that room could fully predict or stop. Mid-meeting, mid-remarks, mid-camera, he stood up and he announced, almost casually, that he wanted to go look at the ballroom, not after the meeting, not as a quick tour later. Right then, as if interior decor suddenly mattered more than the policy discussion unfolding around him, as if a room's appearance deserved more attention than the global consequences sitting at the table. And in that instant, everything froze. Aides stiffened. Executives exchanged glances. That brief, electric silence hit viewers at home, too. The disbelief that comes when you realize this isn't a joke, isn't a aside, isn't a harmless quirk. It's the president abandoning a high-stakes meeting on live television because a personal impulse took over. The symbolism was almost too sharp. The most powerful man in the world interrupting a serious discussion to admire a hall, one shaped, funded, and elevated by the same ecosystem of wealth and influence sitting before him. Interests whose profits expand when access is granted, when attention is easily steered, when flattery becomes leverage. And as he wandered, commenting on how beautiful the space was, complimenting the view, basking in his own satisfaction, something even more revealing happened. Fox News cut away. Not later, not after the fact. In the moment, that matters. Because networks cut away when live coverage becomes dangerous, when the footage stops being manageable and starts becoming liability. When even friendly media decides the safest move is to stop showing the scene unedited, that's not ordinary programming. That's triage. And that's when this stops being one weird meeting and becomes a pattern made visible. Because what you witnessed wasn't an isolated lapse. It was a concentrated version of a style of leadership defined by impulse over preparation, affirmation over analysis, performance over stewardship. A president who demands loyalty yet struggles to sustain focus. A president who equates dominance with disruption. A president who can command a room until the room requires patience instead of applause. What made this moment hit so hard is that it peeled back the curtain. It showed how fragile the control really is when the person at the center won't stay anchored. It revealed a system that is constantly adapting around unpredictability instead of correcting it. And the seconds after he left were almost as telling as the departure itself. You could see the shift. Aides moving into containment mode, officials forcing smiles, participants trying to pretend the interruption was normal. Because when the president breaks the script publicly, the machinery around him has to absorb a shock before it spreads outward. That's the unspoken rule of institutional survival. Stabilize first, explain later. But here's the deeper reality. These meetings are never spontaneous. Every line is planned. Every camera angle is negotiated. Every handoff is rehearsed. Every word is designed to send signals to markets, allies, and rivals. The choreography exists for a reason: stability. And none of that preparation can save you when the center refuses to follow the structure. When the agenda doesn't flatter him, attention fades. When praise slows, engagement collapses. When complexity appears, the room becomes background noise. And in that vacuum, something else grows stronger: the influence of the people who know how to manage mood. That's what makes the oil executive setting especially revealing. These aren't neutral stakeholders. They are professionals in proximity, people who understand access, who understand leverage, who know how to speak in ways that keep doors open. When leadership becomes distractible, flattery becomes a tool, compliments become currency, and policy becomes whatever survives a performance. Meanwhile, figures like Rubio are forced into a role no senior official wants: minder rather than strategist, redirector rather than architect, a human guardrail in a system that should not require guardrails at the very top. In previous administrations, those guardrails existed quietly. Here, they surface on camera: notes, corrections, pivots, broadcast as part of the show. And the fact that a friendly network cutaway tells you the show reached a point where even the usual framing couldn't hold. Because the core problem isn't optics. The core problem is institutional strain. The presidency concentrates enormous power on the assumption of competence, of attention, discipline, and the ability to process complexity. When that competence becomes inconsistent, the surrounding institutions stretch to compensate. They can do it for a while. Sometimes they do it remarkably well, but always at a cost. The cost shows up in mixed signals to allies, in delayed decisions, in agencies waiting for clarity, in markets reacting to remarks that were never meant to be policy, in the slow normalization of behavior that would have been unthinkable in prior eras, like a president walking away from a high-stakes meeting to admire architecture. And normalization is the most dangerous part of all, because once audiences begin to accept distraction as style, improvisation as authenticity, and confusion as realness, accountability becomes harder to enforce. Every lapse becomes excusable. Every warning becomes partisan noise. The bar lowers quietly. Meanwhile, the professionals in the system keep translating. They take offhand remarks and turn them into memos. They reassure allies that stray comments aren't doctrine. They monitor market reactions to casual phrases. They smooth over contradictions. They try to keep the machine functioning while the center drifts. That constant translation drains capacity. It turns governance into stabilization instead of leadership. And in a room already sensitive, where corporate power intersects with government authority, the perception becomes unavoidable. Influence feels transactional, access feels purchased, and outcomes feel shaped less by process than by personal rapport. You don't need explicit corruption for that perception to be damaging. You only need ambiguity, because trust depends on the belief that decisions follow analysis, not applause. That the presidency is guided by focus, not mood. That the world's most serious responsibilities aren't treated as inconveniences interrupting a tour. That meeting didn't just go off script. It showed that the people around the president seemed ready for it. Notes prepared, redirects ready, contingency instincts already trained. As if unpredictability was an anomaly, but an assumed variable. And that's the quiet warning buried inside the spectacle. When a system starts planning around instability instead of correcting it, the cost doesn't arrive as one dramatic collapse. It accumulates. through lowered expectations, blurred responsibility, and a slow drift away from the discipline that power requires. Because governance isn't about looking strong. It's about being capable. And capability requires attention, especially when a room is boring, the praise fades, and the stakes remain enormous.